very nice to be here. I say that, but I'm trying to look at my notes and suddenly realise that reading in front of, I don't know how many people, 50 people, I'm like, oh, did I write that, and is it in English? Anyway, hopefully I'll start to see some sense in these words. So yeah, welcome to those online as well. Yes, and it's the final evening of our seminar series Mind in Harmony, where we're following this commentary which Subhuti has made. So this is the book, Mind in Harmony, beautiful Botticelli cover. Following this book, which Subhuti has written as a guide, and he's drawn on another guide from the Abhidharma, which is exploration of the mind. So we've had some discussion on mapping the mind, and we've looked at various different contributors to what a mind moment is. So that's what Subhuti talks about, is our experience as being like a succession of mind moments, and what do we expect to find in a mind moment, what's definitely going to be there, what's maybe going to be there, and how, because it's the subtitle is The Psychology of Buddhist Ethics. So given each experience arises, how can we make decisions to direct our mind in a way that we find growthful, and how can we avoid falling into sort of disintegrating states of mind that keep us caught in negative mental states, and which lead to negative actions. So this evening I'm going to contrast the most of the content of the book with the idea of the enlightened mind, the ideal that Pranamanas was starting to evoke in the first half. But first of all, I thought maybe I'd just say something a little bit about what the experience of reading this book is like. Partly because the book is very, very content heavy. I've read it now probably 3 times, and it does sort of reward a few readings, and that means necessarily that our talks on this have skimmed over some of the detail. So the experience of reading this, where do I start? Yeah, maybe what this book is an analysis, which means that it's taking in the whole gamut of our present moment experience, and saying, dividing up and saying there's this aspect, and there are quite a lot of subtleties into it, and as I was saying, variation. So we get this analysis, which means a breaking down, and hopefully by the end of the evening we'll come to a synthesis again. So having broken down the mind into the mind moment into constituent parts, what I hope that we come to is something more whole again, and more wholesome. And the experience of reading this book is sometimes quite salutary. So in these mental events, so that the mind is divided up into, according to the Abhidharma, which is the tradition that Subhuti is writing about. Well, one of the Abhidharma lists divides our experience. It says the whole of our experience, although notable exception is fear, so it doesn't talk about fear. Subhuti points that out. But our experience can be divided up into these 51 mental events. And some of them are just basic, so he talks about the constants. Some of them are positive, and there's a huge amount more negatives or afflictions than there are positives. So there are 11 positives: faith, scrupulousness, reverential shame, contentment, goodwill, clarity, ardour, serenity, vigilance, equanimity, equanimity, compassion, and then 26 afflictions. So there's 6 primary afflictions and then 20 secondary afflictions. So the afflictions, so these are things like craving, hatred, conceit, and it goes into more detail about those, definitely outweigh the positives. So, well, that's interesting to think about. And I think perhaps from following this seminar, you might not. I think we've kept the balance quite nicely. But reading the book, one gets quite a strong sense of the afflictions much more. So the chapters have got these nice headings like ardour, serenity, and equanimity. But then what you get is the opposite. He goes into quite a lot of detail of the opposite. And so Subhuti talks about kind of being, it's much more easy to talk about the positive in relation to what it's not. So maybe that's part of why that is structured like that. But I was just wondering, maybe I'll just ask your opinion, like, why do you think that there are more afflictions or negative mental states described than positive ones? Like, does that seem right to you, or have you got any thoughts on that? Yeah, Pete.
I would have thought maybe because positive states are ones where there's a kind of emptiness and it's harder to sort of describe, whereas when we're in a negative state, it's always because of a thing. And so because there's so many different things in the world, it's easier to kind of see it in negatives. And also being divisive is a negative act in a way, like to categorise, it's to make a dualism anyway. And
say something more about the positive, that sort of emptiness thing that you're describing, to make sure I understand.
Okay, so maybe positivity is our natural state when we don't have an object. So if we don't have a kind of a me and a thing, if it's just the me or the experience, then that's positive anyway.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So that's quite positive reading of ourselves, as that positivity is our natural state as well. Any other thoughts? Yeah, over there.
Similar to that answer, the negatives were about the identification with the mind, and the positive seems to be beyond that, like something much beyond the identifying with the separate mind.
Okay.
So it's tapping into something much larger.
Okay, yeah, so positivity has got this something much larger, so necessarily expansive. Okay, good. Any other thought? Ruby, yeah.
Well, is the like the positive state or the cultivating a more positive state? I don't really like using the word positive and negative, but it's more simple.
Yeah.
And,
okay.
Whereas, the one with all of the
afflictions.
Is more complicated. It's like what stops me from getting from being free from myself is myself, like other people have said.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like it's the narrated self. It's like and that causes complications in my life. Whereas to be more simple, that would be more liberating, more free.
Yeah.
And I think that's why there's less to say about the positive, because it's just much more simple.
Yeah.
Do you realise?
Yeah. No, I think that's really good, Ruby. Yeah. Ariane.
Kusalasara, can you repeat for people?
I might not repeat.
Okay,
thanks, Ipali. Yeah. Sorry if you're online, and hopefully you'll get the gist of. I'll sum up some things in a minute.
I was thinking of it as kind of parallel to the body. Like if you go to the doctor and you're unhealthy, there's like a whole list of reasons that you could be unhealthy. So many things could go wrong. But if you're healthy, you just get like a thumbs up and set on your way.
Yeah. That's good as well. And I think that does relate to what Ruby was saying. So yeah, we've got a sense of expansiveness, from positivity, and the divisive nature of afflictions or negative mental states. We've got complexity being equated with negative mental states, and then like everything in good order. That's just like simple. And you've got
I think thinking of it from the more evolutionary perspective, that I think we always say today that we always focus more on the negatives and less on the positives, and I think possibly counter to the more enlightenment perspective, negativity goes against contentment, and I guess drives improvement sort of habit.
So something about troubleshooting there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
More negative emotions maybe bring more positive change. So it's when you feel this more negative side of things, you more act towards improving the situation. So.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, thanks everyone. I sort of don't have a final answer, but that my instinct is that those all those guesses are sort of contributing to the picture of why that is. Yes, and I thought maybe I thought I'd share with you some of the afflictions. I don't know why. Maybe it says too much about me, but or just the fact that reading this book and its predecessor, which was written by our teacher Sangharakshita, which is called Know Your Mind. It covers very similar material, and actually what you can see is possibly, this is my take on it, is possibly personality differences. Know Your Mind is even more sort of pointed and slightly arch in describing how we get into these negative states and what they're like. So, for instance, there's one negative state called inertia or laziness, and it's got loads of subheadings. So inertia, laziness. One kind is staying in bed and the pleasure of lying down and not getting up. So that's the traditional formula, the pleasure of lying down and not getting up. So does anyone know that pleasure? Is that okay? Yeah, so that's one kind. And then there's busy inertia, which is traditionally described as destroying enemies, accumulating wealth. So the reason that's inertia or laziness is because one isn't, one's not being proactive with the positive, if that makes sense. So it can be that we are very, very active, which doesn't look like inertia, but if we're just accumulating wealth and destroying enemies, we're not combating these drives. So we're sort of going down the groove of negativity, and actual energy would be to work against those. And not attending to the afflictions, which is another way of saying it. And then there's some quite helpful ones. So there's one called the inertia of self-excuse. This is how Subhuti describes it. And this is like the victim mode of why we can't practice the spiritual life. Is I can't practice because of my conditioning. So with the kind of life that I've had, I can't really be expected to do better. Maybe I can do a little bit, but I can't really be expected to do better. So Subhuti calls it a pseudo-moral rationale for limiting our responsibility. So that, it starts to get a bit pokey. We start to think, maybe I've been guilty of some of these little stories that we tell each other. And Bhante says that the besetting sin of Buddhism, Bhante is Sangharakshita, the besetting sin of Buddhism is laziness. So these aren't just qualities that we see in everyday life, but there's particular qualities that it's worth pointing out if you're practicing the spiritual life. So maybe different religions have kind of different areas where they can disintegrate, where they're more likely to be less positive, if that makes sense. And a kind of laziness, in Bhante's view, is the one that afflicts Buddhism. And another kind of inertia is inertia of cynicism, where one, and you do see this actually, one starts to talk about spiritual ideals as the confectionery to scare the weak. So a sort of like, what does that mean? A sort of like, oh, well, if you're having real struggle, then of course you turn to religion. If you're not really coping with life, then you might turn to religion. So viewing the spiritual life as just a kind of sop for the afflicted of the world is one of the inertias of cynicism, which comes under this category of laziness. And then there's procrastinating inertia, destructive inertia, and where we find indulging in the afflictions like too compelling. So maybe we're like really inspired, but then like we have really good meditation, but then like, I don't know, you can bring your own kind of strong habits to this imaginative exercise. All too often we then get into a groove of argumentativeness or indulging in whatever pleasures that become sort of neurotic or something. Anyway, that's just one strand, and then there's some of the afflictions that come under the heading of craving. So avarice, concealment, pretense, deceit. So in these, and they've got really good Sanskrit names as well. So where's avarice? Yeah, malice, vihimsa, avarice. Oh no, I've started this and I don't know how to say it. So matsarya, and then rage, krodha. That's my favourite one actually. Rage is krodha with a K. Something very angry about that word. Concealment, maraksha. That's a good one as well. And these are also perhaps useful to point out how these come about in a spiritual life. So maybe some of these afflictions have been sort of underlined in the Abhidharma because they're seen more particularly in monasteries, or they're particular afflictions that you might need to look out for if you're leading a spiritual life. So it's like if you start the spiritual life, i.e. you start practicing Buddhism, you start associating with other Buddhists and become part of a spiritual community in some way or other, well, that's on the whole going to be really positive, but you're sort of going to have to start to look out for how these very underlying sort of human tendencies, how they particularly manifest in these kinds of situations. So Subhuti's talking about concealment and pretense as sort of like people who have like a little spiritual air about them, and he talks about, I mean, I haven't really noticed this, but people in communities who like walk into a room with a particularly mindful air, as if they've just been meditating, or as if they've like just doing something so spiritual, but actually they've probably just been like looking on their phone or whatever. So I don't know, maybe I'm just a bit naive, but I haven't really noticed anyone doing that. But I wonder if that like something about taking on a slightly spiritual persona can be a danger. Yeah. So and Subhuti says that all of the above, so avarice, contentment, pretense, deceit, concealment. Well, first of all, the opposite of all of those is the practice of generosity. And he says, but they're all social evils prompted by craving for material advantage or regard. They distance us from others, and in particular, the very people we should be closest to, the members of the spiritual community. So he's really underlining that as to be aware of that for spiritual practitioners. Reading this can be quite salutary because he often describes like quite subtle but very sort of particular mental states that you can sort of read them and think, oh dear, like someone's someone's been looking into my mind, and it illuminates these in a particular way that means that we can't any longer sort of fuzz over, like just going, oh yeah, that's just a little transgression, like a minor peccadillo or something. They're made very sort of stark, and it's very clear that this needs to be kind of worked on, addressed, if we want to grow our mind in a creative way. Yeah, so I've been looking a little bit lately at, do you know the paintings of Hieronymus Bosch? Does anyone know? So I was looking at those, and I think maybe to just describe, if I can, so they're medieval images of sort of biblical scenes or saints or I don't know, everyday sins, but they've got a religious flavour to them, and they're the weirdest paintings you've ever seen. So they're fantastical. They're like human boat shapes, flying eggs, like all sorts of naked people with wings, and they're sort of they're vastly populated. So any image that you have of Hieronymus Bosch will be like have loads and loads of little figures in, and they're quite pessimistic. So what he's doing is he's looking at human folly, and they're painted very, very carefully, sort of exquisitely carefully, very, very lucid little paintings and little figures, and he doesn't. He's got this quality of not. I don't know what it is. It's got the same quality of sort of illuminating the foolishness of humankind when we just sort of go round and round in circles, or get sort of caught in a certain bad habit, so that it becomes what we are or what we do. So you do get this in, I don't know, other kinds of literature as well, like particularly I was thinking about Dickens, like some of the characters become caricatures sort of by the habits of their, sort of the actions kind of create them. But we're a bit like that. What do I want to say more about Hieronymus Bosch? I don't know if I'm just talking about it because I've been looking at it and I want to, I want to talk about it with someone. But it feels like there's something about how he paints. It's a comment on our foolishness, and it looks pessimistic, but the fact that he's making that comment means that he does see something more for human beings. So he's not an artist who paints heaven in with great aptitude, actually, although there's often a little sign of something positive. He's a Catholic, so it might be like the Christ on the cross or something. But the fact that he sees so clearly human folly indicates to me that he wishes it were otherwise, and can see perhaps that it would be, that it could be. What I was going to say. Yeah, there's a sort of a sort of monstrousness about it. I think I'm going to read you this. So, Sister Wendy, she was a nun who did a lot of art history TV programs back in the day, and I think because she's a nun, she writes quite interestingly about Western art. Anyway, I'll read what she says. So there's a painting called the Ship of Fools, which is an allegory. So he's writing allegories, he's painting allegories. And she says, in this painting, Bosch is imagining that the whole of mankind is voyaging through the seas of time on a ship, a small ship that is representative of humanity. And on the ship there's like a jester, a nun, a monk, a fat person, I don't know, sort of all sorts of human characters. sadly, every one of the representatives is a fool. This is how we live, says Bosch. We eat, drink, flirt, cheat, play silly games, pursue unattainable objectives. Meanwhile, our ship drifts aimlessly, and we never reach the harbour. The fools are not just the irreligious, since prominent among them are the monk and the nun, but they are all those who live stupidly. Bosch laughs, and it is a sad laugh. Which one of us does not sail in the wretched discomfort of the ship of human folly? And then she goes on to say, eccentric and secret genius that he was, Bosch not only moved the heart, but scandalised it into full awareness, which is a really nice way of saying what I think happens when we have these afflictions described, as that they scandalise it into full awareness. And the sinister and monstrous things that he brought forth are the hidden creatures of our inward self-love. He externalises the ugliness within, and so his misshapen demons have an effect beyond curiosity. We feel a hateful kinship with them. So the ship of fools is not about other people, it is about us. So this is how, it does get better, by the way, the evening. More. This is how we can sort of read some of the afflictions, as that they sort of scandalise us into full awareness. But it doesn't end there. We're not just adrift on this foolish ship that we have no control. We are given the positives. We are given the mental, the areas where we can make positive choice. And like I read through some of them earlier. But maybe I want to say something a bit more sort of deeply positive, actually. So one of the images that we had earlier in the seminar series is Pranimanis drew a tree, and at the bottom of it, the tree was the root of ignorance. And the tree was also one of these quite sort of unhopeful images in a way. It's a tree. At the bottom of it was the root was ignorance, and then it kind of flowered into delusion and vagueness, and it was this stinking, poisonous plant. So that's not a particularly positive. It's not a particularly positive view of humanity, but it's not the only view. So it can seem like our root delusion. It can seem like our root delusion is so deep that it can feel a bit hopeless. But what Subhuti's talking about is that below that is the state of mind that's actually pure. So he talks about the mind having 3 evolutions. So I'm going to talk about those kind of 3 layers of mind. And at the centre of it, the 3 evolutions of mind is a spark of awareness, the splash of sentience, which is innocent. So that's the basic, uncomplicated, unafflicted, undeluded nature of our mind, and that's inherent, as is this root of self-clinging, but even deeper and harder to spot is this aspect of our mind that is innocent. So just to say before we go into that a bit more, Subhuti also talks about, we're talking about the mind as if it's a thing, and it's not really a thing. We have to kind of use that language because otherwise it's hard to talk about. So the mind isn't like a machine, and this set of 3 evolutions of the mind, it's just a metaphor for us to help to understand what's happening. And maybe even, just to think of the mind is not an object. So the mind is not an object, but it is that which knows objects. So the mind is a subject that knows objects. Anyway, so this spark of awareness, Subhuti talks about it in a couple of ways that you might recognise. So one of the ways he says that this is you don't even need to have practiced meditation or anything to have noticed this. Have you ever woken in the middle of the night or early in the morning, and part of your mind is not there, but there's a kind of waking consciousness that feels very, very blissful, that can't remember very much. Perhaps it hasn't worked out where you are or who you are. So I've had this a few times, and it's very, very pleasant. And then slowly, sort of the framework of your life kind of comes back, and here I am again. And he talks about it in terms of fainting as well, and that rung true to me. Like a couple of years ago, I accidentally knocked myself out. So I was I'd just been canoeing and was pulling a canoe along a slippery tidal gangway, and I mean I don't remember falling over, but I must have slipped and clonked myself on the head, and it didn't hurt that much, but I woke up and I'd been like pulled out of the mud. I was really happy. So there was just this kind of like complete lack of the weight of my own psychology, my own responsibility for anything in a way. It was just this kind of very pure awareness, and then very slowly a sort of stages of awareness coming back, and then having to respond to people and remember and say sensible things, and start to come back into being a person operating in the world who has opinions about this and that and things. So, and you might also get to this stage in meditation as well. You might start to recognise some of those moments where self-clinging becomes very attenuated, and you feel that kind of innocence or freedom. But do people recognise either of those experiences? Maybe not. I sometimes think that when the reason that we actually no, I'll say that later. It'll make more sense later. So Subhuti talks about this as peeling away the onion, these three evolutions of mind. And at the centre of the onion is this innocent awareness, just mind in its purest form without self-clinging. Then there's a layer of ignorance, which is basic ignorance. So he says this isn't ethically determined. We're pretty much born with it, and that's just how we are. It's something we need to work with. And this ignorance shows us as being separate, ourselves are being separate from everything else around us. So there's a me here, and that me requires a mine, and it pushes away other. So that's basically that layer of ignorance. And then the outer layer of this onion, it's only got 3 layers apparently, are these 11 positives and 26 afflictions. So these are ethically determined. So this is where we have agency. This is where our karma works, where we can make these decisions about what's creative, what's growthful, where we can, a bit like Pranimanis was saying, sort of have hold our ideals in mind and work towards them. We have agency in that area. So the way that Subhuti suggests that we work with this is we very often can't go straight to the centre of the onion. Most of the time we can't. Our minds are too crude in a way. We follow, this is where the threefold path, ethics, meditation, wisdom comes into play. So by starting from the outside, we make positive choices. We bring mindfulness to bear on the afflictions. We use the intensifiers, which we looked at in other weeks, where we deepen our meditation. We can choose what kind of attention we bring to different aspects of our mind. And the more ethically sensitive we are, the more able we are to go into meditation with a clear conscience, with less to sort out in our meditation. So in some ways, meditation can be very good for sorting out our day-to-day life, but at some point we want to go a bit deeper into meditation and just look at the nature of mind without having to worry about I don't know, what we've said to someone or what we think about something. So refining our mind, making the mind more supple in meditation is starts to attenuate this root delusion of ignorance, this separation. And then the wisdom aspect is that which sees through that delusion, and that's where we can eventually stay with this central innocent. I say innocent not as in naive in a way, but more not afflicted by self-reference, not afflicted by the need to defend oneself in a sea of threat. That was another of Subhuti's saying. Yeah, so there's, yes, that's the threefold evolution, the three evolutions of mind. I mean, maybe I'll move now on to the final set of images. I'm just having a thought, okay, how to finish this off. Yeah, so I sort of want to end with the vision. And Subhuti talks about the 5 constants. So, sorry, the reason I'm sort of stumbling is I'm a bit fed up of saying the 5. The 5 this is, the 3 that's. But anyway, okay, let's go into it. So there are 5 constants. 5 constants. So these are parts of our experience that are always there. You can see them you can spot them in meditation. You can spot them in your daily life. We've gone over them quite earlier in the seminar. And what Subhuti is describing is how these become transformed. So we've got this sort of idea of moving from negative mental states to more positive ones. And most of us know in some ways how to do that. But that doesn't mean that we're now at the stage of the enlightened mind. So we looked at the structure of the unenlightened mind, but what is the structure of the enlightened mind? Well, it's when these constants, there will be no afflictions, but when these constants become completely transformed. So the first constant is contact. You can notice the constants now in your own experience as I speak. Contact, which is sparsha, which is when the sense organ, the eye, the ear, the tongue, etc., makes contact with something external. And with the unenlightened mind, it's necessarily distorted. It brings a sense of me versus outside with it, a separation between mind and object. This constant, which is always there in our experience, with the enlightened mind, it's completely transformed. So the structure of perception will not be mistaken for reality itself. So the way that this wisdom is described is a mirror-like. There's a lucidity to it, and it will just notice everything arising. And depending on conditions, without self-reference. So it sees through the constrictions of the nature of perception, if that makes sense. So perception is necessarily a constricted way of experiencing. And the next one is Vedana. So we often really come back to this in meditation. Feeling, hedonic tone is whether we experience pleasant experience, unpleasant, or indifference, like the neutral. So we'll be having a mix of those experiences now, or at any moment in time. And from you can imagine how the consequences of that from experiencing things either positively or pleasant or attractive or unpleasant or painful, that we try to navigate the world in relation to that. Well, with the enlightened mind, this ignorance is disappeared. The significance for us of pleasant or painful is no longer, again, self-referential, and this wisdom of equality arises, which is like a quality of empathy at its highest level. So pleasure or pain is no longer related to what it means for us. We can have this kind of sense of empathy. That's almost like an aesthetic sensibility, Subhuti describes it as. Because the unenlightened mind has this, with Vedana, it has always threaded into is what does this mean for me? And without that, sorrows, happinesses of others, we completely can engage with. We're completely sympathetic towards, without any kind of barrier. So this is the wisdom of equality. And the wisdom of equality is a certain kind of lovingness, and love in the enlightened world has all these different qualities, and this is one of them, a certain kind of love. The third constant is interpretation, and this is where we identify things. So a lot goes on in the world of interpretation. We recognise things, we label them. This is how we organise all of the sense data into recognisable patterns, and we put similar things with other similar things. We give names to things we categorise, and it's easy. As I think this is a particularly easy area to contaminate with self-clinging. So, for example, what do? We sort of decide that certain things are certain things that we like, certain kinds of people. With the label becomes a sort of a selection of people that we don't like, people that we do like, people who think in this certain way. I don't like them, and we tend to stick with that label. So the way that we practice with that is just to be a bit more thorough with our discernment, and have a deeper sense of interpretation. And interestingly, so I think quite often we don't think of the realised mind as having a discriminative faculty, but there is, arising out of this is the wisdom of discrimination. And what this looks like is to see everything in its unique and precious beauty and glory, which is another kind of lovingness. As a different, so like a slightly different flavour of love to the love that comes from equanimity. So like the minute particularity without utility. So what that means is that we don't love things because it offers something for us. We love things because of what they are and who they are, beings. We don't need them to be in any particular way. We don't need them to fulfill any function in our lives. That there's just space to love. So this appreciative, non-conceptual love arises. Two more. So will, which is Chaitana. So this is where We make decisions consciously and unconsciously to follow particular courses of action, even particular trains of thought. There's the whole movement of the mind in relation to the world. It's the whole kind of direction of our minds. And this is really where we're looking at karma creation as well. So the kind of decisions that we make. Yeah, and I think that's interesting, that just to be aware of the unconscious aspect of will. Most of us will have recognised that, having made decisions and then wondering why, and then sort of looking back over it, thinking, oh yeah, there were all sorts of things that were at play in that experience. Yeah, I've definitely done that, where I think, this is my rational kind of tier of thinking. I did this because of this and this and this, and then thinking about it later, a year later or 10 years later, I'll be like, oh no, that's there was this whole train of motivation that I didn't have enough awareness to spot. So I was sort of pretending to myself that there was a kind of rationale, but really I was just being steered by unconscious will. In the Enlightened Mind, that's completely transformed into, it's called the All-Accomplishing Wisdom. So what this means is that it's no longer this intrinsically biased. Yeah. Maybe, actually, what do you think, maybe I'll ask you, what do you think the all-accomplishing wisdom might look like in terms of, so we're talking about the transformation of will from the unenlightened mind to the enlightened mind. See if we can get, is that a hard question? Is that a wave? Yeah.
I'd say it would be the capacity to accomplish what's necessary for the benefit of all sentient beings.
Yeah, great. Yeah, okay. Any additions to that? The capacity to accomplish what's necessary for all sentient beings. What do you think that might look like? Yeah.
I suppose knowing what the right course of action is in any given situation, but knowing it without needing to think about it.
Yeah.
Just intuiting what's right.
Yeah, that's good. Intuitively knowing what's right. And often it's described as spontaneous, which I think it goes with that intuition of without having to think about something. The conceptual framework isn't needed. And Subhuti talks about it. He refers to the suprapersonal force, which is the enlightened being doesn't really have a distinct. It doesn't have a distinct ego identity. It's a vessel for wisdom to act through. So there's nothing in the way of spontaneously responding to whatever would be of benefit. And because of that, there's energy. Energy is freely available. It's always for greater benefit. There's energy. Nothing is tied up with self-defense, so to speak. Yeah. And then attention, which is the final one, binds together the four constants. So this is what we can learn to direct. And again, this is subject attending to object. So it's really the mind relating to what's external to the mind. And as we learned earlier, this can be intensified. So often our attention is directed in all sorts of directions. It's disparate, but we can, in meditation, learn to intensify our attention. And this is the hardest one to talk about. And in the enlightened mind, Subhuti talks about this kind of attention revealing new ways of reality to reveal itself are the the frameworks that we need to hold on, conceptual frameworks that we need to hold on. So the sense world, the world of pure form, and the world of the formless. He says the Buddha, enlightened mind, is free to move in and around all of this. And he talks about meditative experiences opening up new dimensions which wouldn't be available to us in our sort of normal day-to-day mind, and that a Buddha would be at home in any of these dimensions. So this is hard. Yeah, this is the hardest thing to talk about. I think that this transformation of attention to this kind of reality. So what's been described in these wisdoms is, some of you might recognise this, is the Mandala of the 5 Buddhas. So the Mandala of 5 Buddhas is perhaps refractions of what the Buddha mind is, delivered in sort of images that are colourful, blazing with light. They surround the central image of enlightenment. And Subhuti talks about them as, if we think of them all together, these 5 Buddhas. So there's one in the east, one in the south, one in the west, one in the north, and then one above all of them, above us. Each glowing with their own qualities, not only the qualities that I've described, these transformed wisdoms, but then many other qualities, many other symbols, many attendant Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, animal images, etc. They're not separate, but they're distinctive, and they form part of this whole. So we've got the Buddha, Akshobhya, who's dark blue, and he's the one who represents this mirror-like wisdom. We've got Ratnasambhava, who's golden. He's a golden Buddha. And he's the one who represents the wisdom of equanimity, this kind of quality of commonality that runs through all of experience. So he's the Buddha of the South. He's gold. In the West, we've got Amitabha, who's blazing red. He's the Buddha of meditation, and he's the one who's discriminating wisdom. Loves everything in its particularity. This kind of warm, red, lava-like, glowing love that comes from Amitabha. And then in the... where have I got to? And then Vairochana, who's the white Buddha, the illuminator. There's something very mysterious about Vairochana. Subhuti calls him the Buddha of fulfillment, perhaps white being the colour of all colours joined together, white light being made up of rainbow colours, sitting above. And this is what a harmonious mind looks like. It's got distinctive aspects, it's radiant, it's powerful, it's got clear perception, and it's loving. And if we practice, not only can we become more ethical, but this kind of transformation where even the basic fundamentals of our experience, should we think of as constants, even something as fundamental as touching one thing on another becomes a completely different experience with the enlightened mind. So the directness of our basic experience is akin to something that the enlightened mind can experience, and it's of a completely different order. Okay, so that's how we'll end, having evoked the Mandala of the 5 Buddhas. Yeah, I hope that makes sense. I would really encourage you, well, either read the book, or you can find the talks on Free Buddhist audio. Actually, both are good. This book was written from a series of talks in 2001. I can't remember the name of the series, but that's the year, by Subhuti. But have a look, dwell in the mind in harmony, see what you can get from it. And we'll be starting a new series, not next week, we've got a book launch, not the week, no, next week we've got Padma-Vajra coming, the following week we've got a book launch, and then, so in 2 weeks' time, we've got the new series, which is going to be on the Sutra of Golden Light. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.